So sometimes I tell people that I make arcade cabinets, which is not necessarily true. I make custom controllers, and that sounds very detailed, but I try to take my personal approach with custom controllers is very rough and raw and ready. Um, so a custom controller is simply an input device. So something like a keyboard or a joystick or a gamepad, but it's something you've made specifically for a certain game. Sometimes we do cheat and use the same controller for different games, but we don't tell anyone that. So the idea of a custom controller is to make the game more accessible and make the physical act of playing it in a certain space more interesting and unique. When you look at tutorials on how to make your own, say, Street Fighter controller, they emphasize ergonomics and button placement. Whereas when you're making a controller for a one-off event, making it uncomfortable and more tangible and tactile is actually personally, a much stronger approach. I like the player to hopefully have a bit of trouble using the controller and have a bit of a struggle with the interface, and actually have to sort of remind themselves that they're standing in a house, surrounded by people with this stupid bit of wood with buttons stuck into it in odd angles. I don't think that's a bad thing. I like uncomfortable controllers. I originally started to make the games more accessible in a party situation. One thing I really dislike is simply how convoluted gamepads are at the moment, and they're not very economical in terms of using up so many buttons that go unused in certain games, especially the type of games that we show, which tend to be more simple and short. So we would either take the buttons out of controllers and just leave the ones that are necessary, or we just make whole new controllers, which we tended to go towards because an Xbox controller is a very powerful image, and it can dissuade a lot of people from trying. It sort of represents skill and complexity, which people don't feel like they really want to get into after 5 years. I played around with wiring as a kid, and my parents owned an electrical contracting company. So I would play in the workshop and take stuff apart. And when I looked at creating sort of arcade cabinets and those kind of controllers online, it all seemed quite straightforward. I've learned a lot over the last sort of 3 years of really getting into this stuff, to the point where I can comfortably make a controller out of most things quite quickly. And I think one of the major differences between, say, someone who might call themselves more professional than me, is that I have a short attention span with this stuff, and I like a controller that degrades and shows signs of wear and takes these kind of attributes from the physical events themselves. So I like a controller that breaks within a couple of weeks, and then I can build another one, because the act of building is really fun, and if I can build more, then I will. And it also gives me an excuse to put less effort into specific controllers and just slap stuff together, because that's also really fun. So the more fun you can have with it, the more fun people get out of it, I usually find. When looking at smaller art games and old games, there's a weird throwaway culture of finishing something, putting it online for free, and then never thinking about it again. And which also has this odd duality with the fact that now it's online, it can be copied millions of times and has no physical form anymore. So having these parties, having these events, and having a tangible object that is specifically made for a certain game, and sometimes I know the objects take longer to make than the games themselves, and which is not a bad thing at all. I find that having that kind of physical connection with the real world is something that can be shared a lot more tangibly than something online, and it can reach a lot more diverse group of people who might not find themselves looking at this kind of stuff online. So in my head I have this. It kind of sounds crazy. I have this distinction between games that I have made specific controllers for and games that require specific controllers. So, for example, we have a game, Catnips, which is 2 fluffy cats that are physical and lay on the table in front of you, and they have 8 nipples each, which are all interactable. On the screen, there are the 2 cats are represented on the floor of a living room, and pushing nipples in certain directions on the physical controllers will shoot milk in that direction on the cat digitally, and you feed the digital kittens. It's quite simple. The game was made specifically with the controller in mind. The controller actually came first in that process. But something I enjoy about the controller is that while we put a lot of effort and care into making sure that the cats the cats are all made from scratch, but the electronics inside were actually just Xbox controllers that we got off the shelf quite cheap, and they're all fully. We haven't touched them at all. We've just cable tied them to a board and shoved them in a fake cat. We had an option. I mean, obviously, we could have taken them apart and used the components from them. Something I really like is being able to show someone at an event, here's a crazy controller, but actually, I can unzip here and show that it's just Xbox controllers. I'm really hoping, and it works sometimes, of sort of dispelling the idea that custom controllers are inaccessible to make. I could have taken them all out of the shells and saved a lot of space and weight, but I wanted people to be able to think, I could do that quite easily with what I have at hand. And we've made slapdash controllers that mimic them by just wrapping 8 Xbox controllers in jumpers and cutting holes for the joysticks, and it's not the same, but it works. So on the other hand, you have games that maybe just require a controller to replace, say, the mouse or keyboard. I definitely made controllers that are quite simple and usually have something to tie them to the game itself. The easiest one that's quite effective is taking a pizza box and putting a joystick from an old arcade joystick, just shoving it in there with some wood to sturdy it a bit, and plugging that into a computer. We used that for a game that my friend made called World's Fastest Pizza. Oscar Britton from Fremantle, and obviously the pizza theme ties through. So that's a really simple and a really nicely tangible way to tie the game to the physical controller.